Hi! So these colors dried out. Those are my gouache. So I'm going to structure my palette again. So I have my permanent white gouache by Holbein. Place it right in there. And I'm going to work with these 4 colors. So I have a limited palette. Sorry. Next is my Holbein Artist Gouache Dark Green. I apologize for any cute chirps. That's from Dean. And my Holbein Gouache Burnt Sienna. And my, sorry, hair's everywhere. Well, I guess it happens when you have long hair. I have my Holbein Cadmium Red Deep Gouache. Okay, so now fresh gouache we can use because you can't rehydrate old gouache. It's just the quality isn't good. 2 cups of water, paper towel, my small sheet of cold press paper. The dimensions are a little bit bigger than 5 inches by 7 inches. So the brushes I'm going to work with, ooh, that needs to be cleaned more. This is now the dirty water. Okay. So the brushes I'm going to work with, round, filbert, a flat, and a small flat. So 4 brushes. I'm not going to start with a linear placement with graphite. So another name for graphite is pencil. I'm going to draw with my brush. My reference is, sorry, I got paint on my finger. My reference is a chicken. So I'm going to start with my filbert. I'm going to take that's my dirty cup of water. So I'm going to take my clean cup of water, dip only the tip. I'm going to take that much of pigment, of the dark green pigment, and I'm going to put it right here. Now see how thick that is? That's really thick. So that's not even half and half consistency. You would need to add a teeny bit more water than that would be at half and half consistency for traditional application of gouache. So I'm going to clean off this brush. Then I'm going to dab it. Okay. And I'm going to take, again, only dipping the tip in water, the tip of the brush in water, not dunking the whole thing in. Now, see, this is like watercolor. See how I can see the palette through the pool of pigment? So it's transparent, but it's not a wash because the value is really deep. It's a dark value. So it's a saturated value, and that's what I want. So I'm going to load my brush of my manipulated gouache to be like watercolor. And I just did a plainer application. But looking at that, let me clean off my brush again. I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna. A little thick, but also not the color I want. So I'm going to clean off my brush again. I'm going to dab. Take a little more of that green. Ooh, that's a great color. It's not as white as I want it to be, so I'm going to take a little more green. I like that better. So now it's this earthy green. It looks black in the camera, but it's not actually. So this is like half and half consistency. It needs to be thinned out a little more to be like watercolor because it has a lot of body in it. So again, just dip the tip of my brush It needs a little more water. It's a little thick still because the amount of gouache. Okay, this is better. This is, see, like if you were to do it in person, this is, doesn't, the body's been thinned out of gouache. And it's a saturated value and it's been manipulated like watercolor. So now I'm going to go over that. So now we're doing wet into wet there because that area was still wet. And now, there we go, there. See how I just, areas like the wings of the chicken. So I'm doing a combination of linear application and planar when drawing with my brush. See how when I move it on its side or just use the tip and I'm not, that was linear. This is planar when I press down. And see how I'm still traveling with that watercolor bead. Let's see. And bring that down there. So there, a linear application there. Linear. Don't want you to see my hair. Sorry, that cuts in. Okay, bring this down. Okay. There's that. So now, let me see if that goes like that. Go like that. Okay. So I'm gonna, so I started with my shape. I drew for the bigger area of the chicken. I used a bigger brush and I used a filbert rather than a round, but you could have used a round also. So now I need to clean this off again. Try and remove as much green as possible. Clean water. That's pretty thick. Want to manipulate it to be like watercolor. So, and also I don't want that color to be that bright. Ooh, I like that color. Complementary colors, red and green. Okay, clean that off. And I'm gonna take this mixture and put it over here. Okay, and just add, oops, I actually made that a little dirty. Now, this is like, this isn't half and half consistency of gouache. This is like watercolor, but a deeper value. But I just want to add a teeny bit more water. See how that is not as thick as that? See how this has been manipulated more? So then, now I'm going to go like that. Now see how this area was wet and I'm going in with wet pigment again? So now I'm doing the wet into wet. I'm going to add a little bit of red. And I need to add a little more water. Now I'm doing the wet into wet technique for watercolor, but with my manipulated gouache. Because the green was already wet. Now I'm going in with this pink color. And you know what? I want that pink color to be in this area too. I like that. Yeah, like that. I did wet into wet there. And then I want kind of my water's not terribly dirty yet. Thank God. Okay. Yeah, that's good. I'm doing wet into wet. I'm going in areas that are wet and applying wet pigment. So that's wet into wet. I didn't not want that to get right. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I want to take this white gouache and I'm going to put it right here. And I want to add a tiny bit of burnt sienna to the gouache. And I want it to be manipulated. That's still a little too thick. But also, I don't like the color so much, so I want to make it lighter. So I'm going to add more white and thoroughly mix it. This has a little too much body to it still. So for me to manipulate it like watercolor more, I need to add a little more water to it. Okay, I like that better. So now maybe just add a little more warmth. I'm going to go back into the beak too. It's not everywhere, but there's some light areas. Again, wet into wet there. So this is wet into wet. So what I showed you so far was I showed you the surface difference of gouache that's half and half consistency, and also manipulating gouache to be like watercolor. Add a saturated color, so a deep value, a dark value. And I also showed you how to make that, manipulate the gouache to be like watercolor and at that saturated color, deep value, and also showed you how to, talking aloud, how to draw with your brush. So planar and linear application with your brush so that, you know, sometimes you don't have to start with a line drawing, that you could draw with your brush. And we learned how to use manipulated gouache and use a watercolor technique called wet into wet. So that's 5 things. So I'm going to let this dry. And then once it's dried, then I'm going to send off the demo and show you how to apply gouache like dry brush watercolor technique. Thank you so much